Hello, in this video we're going to be finishing probably the nicest guitar I've made to date on account of this glorious quilted maple top. This is a commission build going out to my friend Nick in Hawaii, and he's picked my interpretation of Autumn Burst, which is a combination of dyes and shaders, and I'll show you how we do all of that. So we've got quilted maple with a burst, we've got cherry mahogany on the back, and we've also got a matching headstock veneer, same as the body, and we've even got matching control covers and a matching truss rod cover. So stick around and I'll show you how I do all that. If you find this content useful, then please press the like button, and if you've got any questions, then leave a comment below. I always answer questions, and I hope you enjoy the content. Thank you very much. So to get my Autumn Burst, which is effectively orange, we've got yellow, this is water-based, Crimson Stunning Stains, and then over top of that we will go with Angelus Light Rose Leather Dye, so alcohol-based stain. The two colours will mix to make orange, but they won't fully mix in places, so, you know, depending on how we look at it in the light, sometimes we'll see some yellow, sometimes we'll see some pinks, but it will be an overall orange guitar, and that will look really good. Quilted maple is incredibly soft, so I have sanded the whole thing up to 360. I've gone over it with a damp rag, sanded it to 360 again, and I've repeated that a couple of times. It's yeah, incredibly soft wood. So first we're going to apply some yellow. Now you see I've got a paintbrush here. I learnt this little trick from watching Patrick Eggle on Instagram, and what he does to make life a lot easier getting into these nooks and crannies here is he applies the yellow with a paintbrush right at this edge here, and that means we don't make a complete mess. I'm really looking forward to seeing what this top is going to look like with some colour on it. Now I haven't applied any sanding sealer or anything on this guitar yet. I'm hoping, being the lightest colour, this yellow shouldn't really be too much of an issue with bleeding into the natural binding, and it appears to be doing exactly what I want at the moment. It's looking rather nice. I can already feel that the yellow, being water-based, is starting to raise the grain a bit, so it will get a little bit of a scuff sand after it's dried, just to bring those fibres back down. The Angelus dye won't do that, and I think this is possibly the nicest bit of quilted maple I've ever made a guitar out of. It's just a shame it's not mine. This one's going to Nick in Honolulu, and he's been waiting very patiently for it. I've got a long list of guitars to finish, but this one I'm trying to get finished first because I want to get it out in the post before the Christmas rush. It's also the record for how far I've sent a guitar. My previous best is California. So I'm not absolutely saturating this rag in dye, just because I would rather it go on a little bit dry and then apply another coat rather than completely soak this top. When it comes to colours fading, which tends to be more of an issue if you don't really saturate the wood, Yellows are not really one that's a big issue with fading. Blues, purples, reds, they're much more likely to fade. Yellows are not so bad. Only thing about using the paintbrush here and here is you just got to make sure you really blend that in a bit. So just going to add a drop more. It's less of an issue with alcohol dyes than it is with water-based dye. They say water-based dye blends more easily, but I have my doubts. I think alcohol dye, well, particularly this dye does anyway, blends really nicely. But generally speaking, if you go with 2 coats of dye, you get a much more even coverage everywhere. And I want to try and get this as even as possible, because this finish isn't having any sand back before the next colour. It's really just, I'm going to give it a light scuff just to lower these fibres that have been raised. Although actually they're not too bad. I apologise in advance if my head is casting a shadow. Looks like it might be okay. I probably should have taped off the maple binding on the fretboard. Hopefully we didn't get any on it. There we go. It's almost a grey match. When I've done this before, I've actually cut the truss rod cover out of the headstock veneer, and that gives you a perfect grey match. The trouble with that is you then don't have a piece of wood just here, and I worry that that, you know, is removing fairly useful material from a very delicate area. So what I've done with this is I took my veneer, and then the next slice of maple I took out of here, I cut the truss rod out of that, so it's damn near close for a grain match. But this way it's a little bit stronger. I decided to relocate because it's not very easy filming on that bench up against the wall there. I've got a Merkur Merlon pad here, 360 grit, and I'm just going to really lightly knock all the colour back. Interestingly, the truss rod cover warped a bit after I dyed it with the water-based dye, so I applied some dye on the back as well, and it warped the other way, so I've now got it clamped between 2 pieces of wood, so hopefully that will make that comply, but it might be that I have to dye that separately later. We'll see. There you go, this is just starting to make the figure pop a bit more. Start to see those ribbons showing up a bit more now. Same principle with the paintbrush and the pink dye. I've got a few more bits of cotton here because if any of the yellow lifts out, I'll want to change cotton rag. And this is where it should start to get more interesting. I'm just putting this on sparingly because I don't want it to soak through the tape. It's only paper-based tape, which, to be fair, might have been an error. So the truss rod cover was clamped overnight, and that seems to have kept it nice and flat, so with any luck it will stay that way. To try and get some pink right in that very edge so it doesn't appear yellow under the screw. That'll do. Now the headstock's dry and the truss rod cover isn't, so they're obviously a slightly different shade at the moment. So now that this is all thoroughly dry, I'm going to roll over this binding a bit more. I'm just going to tidy up that edge. I've just got some 120 grit sandpaper, that's my usual way of doing it. I'll start with 120 and then I'll come back with some 220, 240, whatever it is, and then 320. So this here is putting a facet into the side, so it's quite sort of a steep ridge on the edge there, and then the 220 and the 320 will just roll that over nicely to make it more comfortable. Being very careful not to scratch the top. There we go, so we've got all the natural binding rolled over now. Same on the headstock, and got the truss rod cover finished. It seems to have stayed flat, so that's good. So now I'm going to get some tape on the fretboard and then we'll get some sanding sealer sprayed on the die. So here we are again. I've got some cellulose sealer from Chestnut. I'm going to spray light mist coats, 7 or 8 coats, about 5 to 10 minutes apart, and after a few coats this should really start to pop, I think. And the headstock. That'll do for coat 1. I shall do the truss rod separately because I only dyed that this morning, so yeah, we'll let that dye fully dry before I spray it. This is coat 4 going on now. I've stood it up just because it's easier to spray if the can is stood up straight, and you can see it a bit better as well. I'm really starting to wish I kept this top for myself. So I'm going to be spraying some Golden Age Nitorlack clear on this. So Nick wants you know, like a vintage nitrocellulose finish. He doesn't want it relict, just basically wants an old style finish. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to prime this first using their Nitorlack primer, cellulose primer, which I've already mixed up, and so I'm going to spray probably 3-4 coats at least of this primer, get a good coverage. Actually I'm going to do that before I grain fill it, and that will give something for the lacquer to stick to, because this is travelling quite a way. I don't really want it to check on a cold aeroplane on its way to Hawaii, so I'm going to prime it first, then grain fill, and then we'll do the colour coats. So I'll get a couple of coats of primer on it now. Where's my paint filter? I've mixed this about 2 to 1 with a combination of thinners and some of the anti-bloom retarder thinners as well, because actually I'm going to put a bit more in because it's still a bit thick. It's really humid at the moment. We had a proper thunderstorm yesterday, absolute downpour, and it got up to about 70% in the workshop, humidity that is. So yeah, nearly out of that, need to order some more. So, you know, I've now got the dehumidifier running. I was spraying yesterday, and I've sprayed some clear on another guitar this morning, and I haven't had any issue with blushing or anything yet. So hopefully we're going to be okay. That's better. Now it's a bit thinner. So I thin my paint quite a lot, you've probably noticed. If you're using an LVLP gun, low volume, low pressure, like I am, they do tend to like thinner paint. If you're using a HVLP gun, I think you can get away with a bit more, but then you need more airflow, and I've only got a little compressor, so this gun, thin paint, more coats, works out fine. Right, I need a spray mask. So I've got the base coat on this now. Actually, it's been sat for a couple of days, hanging in the booth, and that's because I was waiting for some more grain filler to arrive. And now I'm going to get it all taped off, and we shall get some filler on it. It is extremely finicky, this job of taping up binding, but it has to be done. I put a little pinstripe black veneer between the top and the body on my guitars because I like the look of it, but it does actually make this job slightly easier. Taping off the binding on the fretboard, on the other hand, is a bit more awkward. So is getting into these here corners. And I'm using this, I think it's 1/8 inch blue vinyl tape from 3M, which means I've got to come back and tape again just past it. But what I like about the really thin stuff is it's a bit more pliable around complex shapes. You find that the waste here very often wants to come unstuck, but a thin piece goes around the curves much more easily. And the vinyl tape has a bit of stretch to it. So, yeah, it's much easier to get on and get around the shapes. But the vinyl tape as well doesn't give you the furry edge that you tend to get if you use paper tape. So I don't recommend using paper tape for taping off things like binding, or you'll have a lot of scraping to do to tidy your edges up. And to get this, I'm just going to very lightly score this here with the razor blade, being careful not to go into the wood. Perfect. So, grain filler. This is Gecko Fill by, I think it's by a company called Jenkins. They're dark oak or walnut brown filler. And this is an oil-based grain filler. And it's very messy, which is why I like using it after I've got some paint on the body already. And primer's the best thing for it, really, because it's not glossy, so it doesn't come out of the pores. If you've already sprayed some gloss top coat, then if you go to wipe any excess, there you go, see it's a dark brown, wipe any excess off the top with like a damp cloth or anything, it's more likely you're going to pull it out of the grain and then you're going to end up having to redo it. So yeah, we don't want that. I'm just going to use this pot here to scoop some up. That's going to go everywhere. I should have thought about that. And I should have put my gloves on first. Never mind. Well, I'll just slap that on there. So I can put this lid on. I always find if you don't pour the things out of this in a way, like scoop it out, and you end up pouring it out and getting it on the side, the top never seals properly and it just dries up. Which is why I've waited 3 days to grain fill this, because I was waiting for some more filler, because my filler got all clogged up. So rubber gloves, because this stuff will stain the fingers. That's why I've gone to pains to make sure everything's nicely taped off. So I'm going to get a load on, wipe it all on with a cotton rag, or a bit of old t-shirt in this case, because that's what I have. With this already being lacquered, it's just rubbing around on the top and working its way into the grain. This is working very nicely, actually. So I'm just going to basically do the back, wipe all the excess off, and then I shall do the sides, and then I shall do the neck. And this will darken everything up nicely. So when we spray a dark cherry shader on the back of the guitar, the cherry we're spraying isn't really that dark, although, well, I mean that's a bit of a misnomer really, because the cherry shader is actually, it's probably about 90% brown. You only add a little bit of red to it, otherwise it kind of goes a weird pinky colour. But the dark brown grain, or black grain, that works too. I find brown's better than black in most cases, for pretty much everything, to be honest. That is what makes it look a little bit darker. That, and obviously we're already spraying the cherry on an already brown wood, so that's what makes it look quite dark. So I'm just going to slap a load more of this on there. Yep. We want plenty on there because we want to really work it into the grain, otherwise we just have to come back and do it again. This stuff being oil based doesn't shrink as much as water based fillers do, although I mean I have been impressed with the Nitorlack grain filler. I think that's done a really good job. That's really just not designed for this job though, you know, where I've already primed the back. That stuff works out really well for putting it on bare wood, but it needs a hell of a lot of sanding, I found, to get rid of it. And then I'd just be sanding through my primer, and I don't really want to do that. So Now I'm just going to use this as a Hessian fabric or burlap, and I'm just going to use that to rub the excess down. See, it's not taking loads off, it's not pulling it out of the grain, and I'm only rubbing lightly as well, and that's just a much tidier job. It's important to get it in the corners too, around these edges, because yeah, you want that feeling smooth. You don't want to feel the grain on the edges, and it does take quite a bit worked in there. Cool. So I'll get the rest filled, and then I shall leave this for probably 2 days. Absolute minimum 24 hours, no less than that. 2 days is better. If it's not fully dry, if you come and like wipe it down with a bit of white spirit or just a damp rag, then if it's not fully dry, you just end up wiping it out of the grain if you use anything that's got a bit of liquid on it. So we don't want that. This is looking spot on now. Now I think that the key to a good convincing cherry colour is actually to use mostly brown. In fact, I think we're just going to add a splash of red. This is mahogany brown from chestnut, which is an alcohol-based dye. In my experience, you can use pretty much any alcohol-based dye in with your lacquer. At least that was what works for me. So I've got 50-50 lacquer and thinners in here. I may add a bit more thinners yet to just to thin it up slightly, because we really don't want much material going on. We just want the colour, really. We want to get the build from the lacquer on top of the colour, not from the colour. So I'm just going to add, this is Angelus red leather dye. Now you can go over the top with this and it will just go like a kind of weird luminous pink. So we just need a splash of red, not going mad. I reckon that's enough. Let's have a look. If this goes a bit too red and we want to kind of, you know, just make it look a tiny bit more orangey, I've got some honey leather dye, which is like a kind of a dark amber, which works really nicely. If you want to do like a kind of a dirty lemon type colour, this is a really good one to use. And this could be too red now. And let's just, got a bit of mahogany here. That's looking pretty good. So you can see I put way more brown in. I must have put probably 90% brown in, but actually that's, you know, that's looking cherry to me. That's looking really good actually. Do I want to add just a splash more red? Possibly. This is going to look slightly darker on Nick's guitar because obviously I've used the dark brown grain filler, whereas this is just an offcut of a neck blank. So I wonder if we might go with that, you know. Just add a glug more on there. Add a bit of concentrate. Yeah, so it's looking even redder. That's actually a really nice dark cherry. One of these days I'm going to start measuring so I know what my colours are, so I can recreate them exactly. Never mind. I'm going to add a glug more thinners to this, because this is, I think it's a tiny bit too thick. Obviously we're spraying it really sparingly, so we shouldn't get runs, but we do want this material to be mega thin. Another quick stir. I'll give it another quick stir and another quick test. Yeah, that looks really good. Love that. Nick wanted a dark, dark cherry, so I think that's going to be absolutely bang on. Obviously you can buy sort of like the exact match colours. You can even buy things like out of a rattle can. You can buy like a vintage cherry lacquer. Gets a bit expensive doing things like that, and the colour on the can is not necessarily the colour that you're really looking for, so mixing it up. with dyes you've already got, in my case, and lacquer you've already got, is the better solution.
You see I got this bit taped off here. On my guitars there's a tiny little slither of mahogany here, and if I don't spray that first it just looks weird, so I've just got that taped off and I'm going to get that bit first. Now I can dispense with that bit of tape. So I haven't taped off the front, I'm just spraying from this angle or from the back so I won't get anything on the front there. Now we need the control covers. Come on. These are held in place with toothpicks because they need to be a fairly loose fit. If they're not a loose fit, by the time they've got a bit of lacquer on them, you won't be able to get them in and out, they'll be too tight. But they do need to be painted in situ or they'll look different. I'm just going to spray all the really tight areas first, like in here. If you don't, in order to get the coverage, you have to go really dark everywhere else, which doesn't look very good. So. Now I'm going to spray from quite a distance to make it as even as I can. Looking good. And I've just run out of paint, so that was perfect.
So same process as before, I'm just mixing up some black now, a don't need much. I'm just adding a few drops of lacquer. This is the same Golden Age lacquer, by the way, that I'm using for all of this. So, a few drops of lacquer, mostly thinners. I've just used the same pot that I mixed the red up in. I just gave it a swill about, that's all. It doesn't need to be super duper clean. We're going way darker now, and this is for just a dark edge burst we're going to do. And I've got some black spirit dye from Chestnut. It's the same as the brown I was using, and I'm going to dump a whole load of black in there, quite a lot. So Nick wants this dark edge burst to be pretty dark. I was actually considering using some black paint, just black nitrocellulose paint, as opposed to adding dyes, but the only black nitro I've got in at the moment is a different brand, so you know, better to be safe than sorry. I'm going to add some brown to it as well. Black has a tendency to look a teeny bit blue when you just add black dye to lacquer, so I'm just going to give a good glug of brown, maybe a little bit more, and we'll see how dark that is. I have a feeling I may want some more black dye in this, yeah, we'll see. Let's try that on a bit of mahogany. Yeah, I need some more black on that, because that currently is a very dark brown, but we want it to look even darker. See how that looks now. A bit more. It's amazing really, because when you're doing things like blacks, you need so much colour in there to actually make it look dark. But when you're doing something like red or yellow, you really don't need very much at all. Let's have another look. Yeah, I think that'll do us. I think I've got plenty. It's a bit thick at the moment, so I'm just going to add a bit of thinners to it. I think I've mixed up way more than I need. The red, I was bang on the amount I need, just out of luck. Let's add a bit of anti-bloom thinners. That'll do. This needs to be super thin when you're just doing a shader, just like it's basically the consistency of water. There we go. Now I'll get that in the gun and we shall spray a burst. So you probably noticed I didn't put any tape around the edge. I'd not long sprayed the cherry, and it's extremely delicate, so taping off is more work. So I'm now just very carefully sanding over the overspray that got onto the binding. Now if we sand too far that way, we end up revealing some orange underneath the burst on the edge, so we don't want to do that. If we sand too far that way, we end up sanding the cherry, so we don't want to do that. If we end up catching the top, we'll sand the burst off. So any of those elements goes wrong, and well, you're fucked basically. Do it again. So this is very careful work. And once this bit's done, I will spray some clear over the top to lock all the colours in, and then yeah, coats of clear until we're done. Sprayed the truss rod cover, so I need to do the same on that. To give it that natural edge.